Hey everyone! Today we're diving into a fascinating chapter of history, the Christianization of Anglo-Saxon England. Now, when the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Britain, they didn't bring Christianity with them. Instead, they brought their own Germanic pagan beliefs. But how did a land once filled with pagan rituals and gods turn into a Christian stronghold? Let's rewind a bit. Christianity had already made its way to Britain during the Roman Empire, spreading across the British Isles over several centuries. It was pretty well established by then, especially after the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, when Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Back then, the Christian church in Britain was organized, with bishops in places like London and York, and a hierarchy that answered to the church in Gaul. But everything changed in the 5th century. The Romans withdrew from Britain, leaving the local Roman citizens to fend for themselves. This created a power vacuum that led to the collapse of centralized control, and as the Anglo-Saxons moved in, their pagan beliefs began to dominate. Christianity wasn't completely wiped out though. It hung on, especially in the western parts of Britain and Ireland. Ireland is where things get interesting. While the rest of Britain was dealing with Saxon invasions, Christianity was thriving over there, thanks to figures like Saint Patrick. Born into a Christian family in Britain, Patrick was kidnapped by Irish raiders and taken as a slave to Ireland. After 6 years, he escaped, but a vision later called him back to Ireland to spread Christianity. His efforts were incredibly successful, and Ireland remained a Christian stronghold. So, even as Anglo-Saxon paganism was on the rise in England, Christianity was far from defeated. It wasn't until the 7th century, when Pope Gregory the Great sent a mission to England, that things began to shift back toward Christianity. The conversion process often started with the baptism of kings and nobility, who then influenced their subjects to convert as well. And of course, the hard work of missionaries played a massive role in converting the general population away from their old Germanic gods. And after the Romans pulled out of Britain, a new chapter began with the arrival of various Germanic groups. This wasn't a single massive invasion like you might imagine, but rather a series of smaller migrations. These groups, mainly from places like the Frisian coast, the Jutland Peninsula, and southern Norway, trickled into Britain over time. The settlers, who came to be known collectively as the Anglo-Saxons, managed to establish themselves in different parts of England, forming several kingdoms by the 7th century. Now, while historical sources talk about battles and the displacement of native Britons, it's likely that the new Anglo-Saxon rulers were a warrior elite who gradually took over an existing population that still had its roots in Roman Britain. As these new rulers settled in, they began to blend with the locals through intermarriage and the merging of cultures. This led to the rise of a distinct Anglo-Saxon culture that combined elements of Germanic paganism with what was left of Roman traditions. By the late 6th century, Christianity seemed to be on the decline in Britain. The Anglo-Saxons were mainly polytheistic, worshipping gods like Woden and Thunder, who were quite similar to the Norse gods Odin and Thor. But things were about to change with the arrival of Christian missionaries. Pope Gregory the First was determined to bring Britain back into the fold of Christianity, so he sent a mission led by a monk named Augustine. Augustine and his mission landed in the Kingdom of Kent in 587. This wasn't a random choice. Kent's king, Ethelbert, had a Christian wife, Bertha, who was a Frankish princess. Although Ethelbert himself was a pagan at the time, his wife's faith might have made him more open to Augustine's message. According to Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, Augustine was allowed to settle in Canterbury and start preaching, and it wasn't long before he made a big impact. In 597, Augustine succeeded in converting King Ethelbert to Christianity. This was a game changer. When a king converted, it often set off a chain reaction, leading many of his subjects to follow suit. And that's exactly what happened. Christianity began to spread throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, one baptism at a time. And the spread of Christianity in Anglo-Saxon England really gained momentum after Kent's King Ethelbert embraced the faith. His influence didn't stop with his own kingdom. He also managed to persuade his nephew, King Sabert of Essex, to convert in 604. Now, this move might have been more about politics than piety. By getting Sabert to adopt Christianity, Ethelbert was not just promoting the new faith, but also solidifying his dominance over Essex. But Ethelbert's reach didn't end there. In the same year, King Redwold of East Anglia was baptized in Kent by Mellitus, the first bishop of London and a key player in the Gregorian mission. Like Sabert, Redwold's conversion was likely influenced by political motives. Interestingly, even after his baptism, Redwold didn't fully abandon his pagan practices. He kept his old gods alongside the Christian God. This blend of beliefs shows how the Anglo-Saxon elite might have initially viewed Christianity as just another powerful deity to add to their collection, rather than a total replacement for their old gods. The spread of Christianity wasn't a smooth, uninterrupted process though. In 625, Paulinus, another member of the Gregorian mission, headed north to Northumbria to convert King Edwin. After some initial reluctance, Edwin agreed to be baptized in 627, following a successful military campaign. Yet his efforts to convert his people were minimal, focusing instead on using his new faith as a tool to strengthen his power over other rulers. For instance, he convinced Eorpwald of East Anglia to convert in 627, helping Edwin solidify his position as one of the most powerful rulers in England. But setbacks were inevitable. After Ethelbert's death in the early 7th century, his son Eadbald refused to be baptized, causing Kent to slip back into paganism temporarily. However, this didn't last long. By 624, Eadbald had converted, possibly due to the influence of his Frankish wife, Ym, and the strong ties Kent had with Christian Frankish trade. Meanwhile, in Essex, Sabert's sons, Sext and Seward, expelled the missionaries and reverted to paganism after their father's death, leaving Redwold of East Anglia as the only nominally Christian king in Britain for a time. East Anglia faced its own challenges when a rebellion led to the death of Eorpwald and the rise of a pagan nobleman named Riecbert, who brought the kingdom back to paganism for 3 years. Northumbria also saw a resurgence of paganism after Edwin's death, with his successors Osric and Eanfrith openly returning to their old gods. Despite these setbacks, Christianity's revival came through regime changes. In East Anglia, Riecbert's rule didn't last, and Sigebert, another of Redwold's sons who had been in exile in Gaul, returned to take the throne. Sigebert was a committed Christian and brought with him Bishop Felix from the Burgundian Church, establishing a strong Christian presence in his kingdom. He also supported the Irish monk Fursey, who played a significant role in converting the local population. In Northumbria, it was Oswald, Eanfrith's brother, who turned the tide. After defeating the British King Cadwallon ap Cadfan in battle, Oswald reclaimed Northumbria and re-established Christianity there. Having been baptized during his exile with the Scots, Oswald brought back missionaries to help convert his people, including the influential Bishop Aidan, who founded the monastery of Lindisfarne in 605. Aidan's work, along with the efforts of his monks, was instrumental in spreading Christianity throughout Northumbria. As Christianity began to take root more firmly, other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms followed suit. Essex became Christian again in 653 under King Sigebert the Good, although it briefly relapsed into paganism in the 660s. Mercia, too, embraced the faith after King Pinda's son, Peda, converted in 653. Even Sussex and Wessex eventually came on board, despite some back and forth between paganism and Christianity. By the end of the 7th century, Christianity had spread across all of Britain. No Anglo-Saxon kingdom would openly return to paganism, and their kings continued to be baptized well into the 8th century, marking the firm entrenchment of Christianity in Anglo-Saxon culture. And it's important to understand that the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms wasn't a simple or swift process. Even though we have accounts from writers like Bede that tell us when various kings and nobles were baptized, these events don't fully capture how Christianity actually spread among the general population. Take, for example, King Redwold of East Anglia, who famously kept a shrine that housed both Christian and pagan symbols. This dual approach likely reflects a gradual, incremental acceptance of Christian beliefs among the Anglo-Saxons. It wasn't a sudden switch from one faith to another. Instead, people slowly integrated Christian ideas into their existing pagan framework. Even in a place like Kent, where rulers had been Christian for a while, pagan practices were still common among the general population. This is evident from King Bjorsenbert's actions in 640, when he ordered the destruction of pagan idols and mandated the observance of Lent. These measures suggest that despite the conversion of the elite, old beliefs were still deeply rooted among the people. The truth is, the spread of Christianity among the general population probably took decades, if not centuries. While it may have been easier for the elite to convert due to political motivations or the influence of foreign Christian courts, ordinary people were slower to abandon their traditional beliefs. In many cases, conversion was less about personal belief and more about political power. For kings and nobles, adopting Christianity was a way to assert dominance or forge alliances with neighboring Christian rulers. Elite patronage played a significant role in facilitating the spread of Christianity. Without the support of kings and nobles, missionaries would have had a much harder time preaching and converting people. For instance, in East Anglia, King Sigebert granted land to missionaries like Felix and Fursey, which allowed them to travel throughout his kingdom and spread the Christian faith. Similarly, in Northumbria, King Oswald's support was crucial for Aidan's mission to establish the monastery of Lindisfarne and preach throughout the region. What's particularly interesting is the role that Irish missionaries played in this process. While the Gregorian mission, sent by Pope Gregory I, managed to baptize a number of Saxon kings, it was the efforts of traveling Irish missionaries in places like East Anglia and Northumbria that truly laid the groundwork for converting the general population. These missionaries didn't just preach, they founded monasteries, which became centers of learning and hubs for spreading Christian doctrine. Fursey in East Anglia and Aidan in Northumbria, for example, established monastic communities that acted as bases from which they could reach out to the surrounding pagan communities. This grassroots approach was vital in gradually bringing Christianity into everyday life for the Anglo-Saxons, creating a foundation upon which the new faith could build over time. So, as we can see, the conversion of Anglo-Saxon England was a complex and lengthy process that involved much more than just the baptism of kings. It was about building relationships, fostering goodwill, and slowly weaving Christianity into the fabric of everyday life, often one small step at a time.